The History of French Colonization of North America and the Caribbean by Archie Thomas Lopez. Introduction. France has had a huge influence on every continent on Earth, from the spread of Republican ideas in Europe to increasing European influence in Asia and to colonizing and therefore shaping the borders of Africa. France has seen it all. And of course, I couldn't not mention France's huge influence on North America. If not for France, there would be no United States as we know it, and no French influence in Quebec and Louisiana. Part 1. Jacques Cartier and the Start of New France. Christopher Columbus and his crew became the first Europeans, besides the Vikings, to see the New World in 1492. Spain rushed to colonize the fertile islands of the Caribbean. Spain expanded into Mexico and Central America. Another Iberian nation, Portugal, also established a colony in Brazil. The Age of Discovery, a time of colonization and exploration, had begun. Many people believed that there was a way to access Asia and its riches through the Northwest Passage, a route that would be disproved as more and more of North America was explored. King Francis I of France wanted to find this Northwest Passage and recruited Jacques Cartier. Cartier was born on December 23rd, 1491 in Saint-Malo, France. Cartier embarked on his first journey out of 3 on June 9, 1534. He traveled around Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. He returned with 2 Native Americans he had kidnapped. When King Francis heard of the discoveries of riches in new land, he sent Cartier back with an even bigger crew and more supplies. Journey 2 would prove to be more of a success. He set sail on May 19, 1535. He spotted the St. Lawrence River and, thinking it was the Northwest Passage, sailed down it. Cartier established a small base near Quebec and sailed down to the St. Lawrence to modern-day Montreal. He found ores that he mistakenly thought were gold and diamonds. He stayed in Quebec for the winter and set sail back for France after capturing Iroquois chiefs in 1536. The new promises of wealth sparked Francis's interest even more. Now Francis had dreams of colonies in North America, like Spain and Portugal. He sent another Frenchman, Jean-Francis de la Roquette de Roberval, to fulfill this dream. Cartier embarked on his third journey with a body of colonizers on May 23rd, 1541. Despite the king's orders for Roberval to colonize the area, Cartier established a colony in Quebec. He stayed back through winter and collected more wealth and materials in Canada. After winter, he abandoned the colony and set sail back for France. He encountered Roberval, whose journey had been delayed, in Newfoundland. Roberval ordered Cartier back to Quebec, but Cartier managed to escape during the night. Although France wouldn't invest in these new colonies, and because of this the colony in Quebec would fail, or send any permanent settlers for almost 70 years, Cartier established a base for any future French colonies. Part 2. Early colonization. France sent its first permanent settlers to Quebec in 1608 under the command of Samuel de Champlain, another explorer who embarked on journeys through the Great Lakes. Quebec had trouble attracting settlers because of its cold climate. France made a deal with the Company of New France. The company would send settlers to New France, around 200 to 300 a year, in exchange for land rights and therefore control of the fur trade. Quebec would be captured by Britain during the Anglo-French War, which lasted from 1627 to 1629. Although Quebec was to be returned in the Treaty of Saint-Germain, the occupation damaged New France and stunted its growth. Part 3. Louis XIV and New France's growth. Louis XIV is known for a lot of things, especially his flamboyant lifestyle, which earned him the nickname the Sun King. Louis XIV had many plans for New France that would expand its population and economy and lead to the golden age of French colonization. Louis XIV would also help make New France more like its mother country. Louis XIV abolished the Company of New France and made New France a royal province, meaning it got direct rule from France and the royal crown. He also gathered up a force to wage war on the Iroquois tribe, a war that was successful, at least for France, and allowed further settlement. 4,000 soldiers and almost 1,000 single women stayed to further settle New France. Louis also established a court of law in New France. Jean Talon was appointed intendant, a position which served as the lead political and civil figure and would further economic growth and bolster many industries in the colony. Louis XIV also built more forts in New France, which would play important roles in future conflicts. Speaking of conflicts, New France found its way into a European conflict, the War of the League of Augsburg, although in the colonies it was known as King William's War. France would stop a British invasion of Quebec and occupy parts of New England. France would gain the Hudson Bay in the Peace Conference. Louis XIV would also push for the exploration of the Mississippi. Part 4. Robert de La Salle in Louisiana. Robert de La Salle was born on November 22nd in 1643 in Rouen, France. He later moved to New France and became a fur trader and lived near many Native Americans, which allowed him to learn their languages. Robert de La Salle also heard many stories from Native Americans about a huge river that lay further west. La Salle expanded French forts in Quebec. La Salle got permission from King Louis XIV to explore these legends of a huge river. After many almost not failures, he managed to reach the Mississippi in 1682 and sailed down it to the Gulf of Mexico. He called the territory Louisiana after King Louis XIV and claimed the newfound fertile land for France. La Salle also established French forts in the northern part of the Mississippi River. In 1685, Louis XIV sent him to harass Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, who France was at war with. La Salle got knocked off his course and landed in Texas. He tried to find the Mississippi, but was unsuccessful. His men, who were starving and dehydrated, thinking he was crazy, he killed La Salle. Robert de La Salle had managed to claim the territory of Louisiana for France and get them easy access to the Gulf of Mexico. Part 5. The economy and policies of New France. New France did not have a very large population. In 1754, its population was only 7,000, while the British 13 colonies had a population of 1,500,000. New France had large fishing, lumber, and farming industries, but its economy was based on fur trading. Fur trading was a huge industry and was often at the heart of wealth and politics in New France. There were population centers along the St. Lawrence River, like Quebec and Montreal, and there was also a good amount of people in New Orleans. The rest of France had a small and spread out population of fur traders and farmers. New France was a heavily Catholic colony and was intolerant of Protestants, also known as Huguenots, in France, even going as far to ban them from settling in New France. France also established missionaries to convert Native Americans to Christianity, but they had limited success. French colonies were more friendly to Native Americans than their fellow colonizers, Britain and Spain, but still got into regular conflicts with them, and by default were stealing their lands. You really can't avoid stealing somebody's land if you're a colonizer. This friendliness was probably due to the widely spread out and rural population of New France. Part 6. The Downfall of New France and the 7 Years' War. The downfall of New France came with 2 wars against Britain, both of which had severe consequences. The first one of these wars was Queen Anne's War, the American extension of the War of Spanish Succession. France would lose the Hudson Bay, which had won in King William's War, Acadia, and Newfoundland. The second and most important of these wars was the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, or in the Americas. Both France and Britain claimed the Ohio River Valley, and after the French built forts there, Britain sent a hot-headed general by the name of George Washington to confront the French in 1754. The confrontation soon turned violent, and starting the 7 Years' War. France allied with many Native American tribes, which is why the conflict is sometimes called the French and Indian War. France had initial success in New York, but Britain had success further north and later south. Britain's naval superiority prevented French reinforcements from reaching North America. Soon all of France's gains had been reset, and Britain was closing in on Quebec. Soon, Quebec, the capital of New France, fell, effectively ending the North American theater of the 7 Years' War, even though Spain would join the war. France would lose everything in the peace conference. Britain would got control of all land east of the Mississippi, while Spain would get the Louisiana Territory as compensation for the loss of Florida. France did still retain some sugar colonies in the Caribbean. Part 7, Saint Dominican. French pirates had inhabited the island of Hispania, but France had yet to officially colonize the island. In 1659, France finally established a colony in northern Hispaniola. It was administered by the French West Indies Corporation. It was a slave economy and produced cacao, coffee, and cotton. Slavery was briefly abolished after the French Revolution, but brought back by Napoleon Bonaparte's regime. Napoleon Bonaparte wanted to use the newly acquired Louisiana Territory he had bought from Spain to serve as the extension to Haiti. Haiti revolted against French rule in 1791. This was a bloody revolt, with Napoleon sending in troops to try to calm the madness. These French troops would commit brutal massacres trying to suppress the rebels, but thanks to guerrilla warfare and conflicts in Europe that were worth more time and money than a small Caribbean island, Haiti was able to break free in 1804. After this failure, Napoleon sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States of America. Part 8, Napoleon III and Mexico. Louis Napoleon became president of France after the chaos of the 1848 revolution in France. He would later crown himself emperor in 1852 after a coup against his own government. Napoleon III had big ambitions for France's influence abroad, and one of those ambitions lay in a most unlikely place, Mexico. Mexico had been in a civil war since 1860 between the liberal faction and the conservative faction. Many European countries had invested in one side or the other, and after the Civil War was over, the new liberal government found itself in a sticky situation. The European countries, including France, wanted Mexico to pay back the debts they had invested in the losing side. A coalition that included France, Spain, and Britain landed in Mexico in 1861. After France landed in the Yucatan and expanded its invasion force, Spain and Britain pulled out of the war. France soon found itself at the gates of Mexico City, and after a horribly failed attempt, they captured Mexico City. Soon, when France would instate a government led by an Austrian man, Maximilian Habsburg. The United States came out of its own civil war in 1865 and began supporting the remaining Mexican resistance. This support changed the tide of the war, and soon France evacuated Mexico in 1867. Conclusion. France has been one of the few countries that has shaped world history forever, especially in North America, which might be the continent that France has the most influence in, just after Africa and Europe. French influence, culture, and language can be found in Quebec and along the St. Lawrence River in Canada. Further south, French culture can be found in New Orleans and Louisiana. Without France, who knows what North America would look like.